Georgia beat number 1 Texas on the road, and in doing so, they shook up the playoff picture a little bit. Now things are a little bit different moving forward, especially in the SEC with this huge win by the Georgia Bulldogs. And I will be the first to admit I was wrong. I thought Texas was going to win the game. I fell victim to the hype train as well as the majority of media members and experts out there and doubted Georgia heading into a big game. And that was a mistake by all of us, right? But they gave us reason to doubt them. It wasn't just, hey, I'm down Georgia. They gave reason, and they didn't play well in some of those games. But we move on. And now the Dogs are projected, look, and this may or may not happen, but the Dogs are projected to have a first-round bye. That happens if they win the SEC championship, right? But if it fell the way it did with the rankings, if Oregon is the best team, they're going to get a bye. Georgia's the best team. They're going to get a bye. Miami and Iowa State, I believe, are the tops of the rankings for the ACC and the Big 12. So that's how you're looking at this thing. But more specifically in the SEC, Georgia shook up the standings because Texas was one of the 3 undefeated teams. And then now there's 2, Texas A&M and LSU. And if the season ended today, that would be your SEC championship, not Georgia and Texas, right? Who are each 1 loss in the conference now, with Georgia having a loss to Alabama and Texas losing to Georgia. It would be A&M and LSU, who each have a loss, but neither of them to SEC schools. LSU obviously losing to USC in that first game of the season, and A&M losing to Notre Dame. LSU still has to play, guess what, A&M this week. So that's impossible for both of those teams to end up undefeated in conference play. It'll be interesting the way that those things shake out. Obviously, Georgia has to go on the road and play Ole Miss. Georgia still has to play Florida. Georgia still has to play Tennessee at home. Those are the 3 SEC games remaining, along with Georgia Tech and UMass, which will not affect Georgia in the SEC standings. But obviously it will for their overall rankings. Missouri is also a 1-loss SEC team. I don't know what's going to happen when Missouri and Alabama play in Tuscaloosa. That has become a more interesting game to me. Missouri struggling to beat teams that people think that they are better than, and they are better than, and Alabama doing the same thing, obviously just lost on the road to the Vols. Probably very easily could have lost to South Carolina in a close game, and obviously lost to Vanderbilt. It's been a bad stretch for Alabama over the last month. After beating Georgia, it's gone downhill fast for Kalen DeBoer and the Tide over there in Tuscaloosa. So it's funny how fast these things fluctuate, and it is also just kind of how it goes as the season goes on. This is a long football season. I've been trying to tell that to everybody who maybe hasn't quite got that part. Things are still going to shake up, right? It's not going to be A&M at the top forever in this thing, especially when they're going to play each other here in the next week or so. I still think it's probably going to be Georgia and Texas in the SEC championship, but LSU is definitely in the mix. A&M, of course, in the mix. When you look at Texas's schedule, it's pretty easy. I think they're going to beat Florida. I think they'll beat Vanderbilt. I think that in a game against A&M, that one's a little bit more interesting. So the assumption here has been Georgia, Texas, Bama are going to be in the SEC championship, but obviously A&M and LSU are still in the mix. And look, all the 2-loss teams are still in the mix too, because what if Georgia loses to Tennessee? Well, all of a sudden then Tennessee is only a 1-loss SEC team who you would think could get in. This has been, I think I said it on Riding Home the other day, a total crapshoot in terms of the league and how it's been. But I think that when you look at Georgia's schedule, we doubted them, right? I doubted Georgia against Texas. I thought that they could have beat Auburn by more. I thought that the Mississippi State game was out of hand, and then it got back in hand for Mississippi State when I thought Georgia should have blown them out. Obviously, what happened at Kentucky happened, but look, South Carolina hung it on Kentucky. Vanderbilt beat Kentucky. A lot of teams played better against Kentucky than Georgia did. It was puzzling what happened that night. And then you see how they get up for these big games. And it's the same thing we talked about in 2022 when people were worried about how they struggled with Samford, how they struggled with Kent State, how they struggled with Missouri. Well, They blew out other teams, right? They beat Tennessee, who was ranked number 1 in the college football playoff, and Georgia was ranked number 3 when it should have been the other way around. That game happens in Athens, and Georgia dominates them. This Texas game reminds me of that, and the score reminds you of that too. 27-13 was the final score of that 2022 game, 30-15 in this game. It was similar the way that Georgia got out in front, dominated, and tried to just control the pace of the football game from there on out. It is a huge game, and they absolutely strangled their opponent, and now Georgia's ranked number 2 in the college football, or in the AP poll. And it'll be interesting to see how Georgia gets ranked in the college football playoff rankings here soon. That'll be coming up in the next couple of weeks. Georgia should make the playoff, right? The question heading into the Texas game was, well, if Georgia loses this one, it's going to be tough, right? Because they've already got that loss to Alabama. And my rebuttal to that always was, hey, just even if they do lose to Texas too, I think that there's going to be plenty of 2-loss teams that are going to make it, right? Right now, if you look at the top 12 and you look at who would be in it, the cutoff would be Notre Dame is number 12 right now. They would not make it, right? The highest group of 5 would get in there, and that's Boise State at the moment. But you look at this, and there's a bunch of 1-loss teams there, and these teams have to play more other people in the top 10. So there's going to be multiple 2-loss teams, maybe a 3-loss team or two. Georgia's playoff chances were not going to end if it lost to Texas. But now that it has beaten Texas, it's hard to see Georgia lose some of these games. Maybe Georgia loses another, but I still think it's going to make the playoff kind of no matter what. I just have a hard time seeing Georgia lose 2 more games before the SEC championship. 1 more game, And if you just look at everyone's schedule, the most trustworthy team to make it to the end at this point in the conference is Georgia, to make it to that. And if you make it to the SEC championship game, I don't care if you end up 9-4 would be pushing it, but if you're 10-3, 11-2, right, SEC championship loser, you are 100% going to be in the college football playoff. So Georgia has positioned itself really, really well. Ryan Curley from Dawg Post, not positioning this ad really well in the video. Make sure you're looking at our newsletter. I've got a link to it down below. It takes just a couple of seconds to sign up. Been a lot of activity over on Dawg Post with a very chaotic Georgia-Texas game. A lot of content going on over there. Make sure you're looking at the site dawgpost.com, and thank you for checking it out again. Ryan Curley from Dawg Post, giving thanks. Right? When you look at the playoff picture, I think that there's been predictions anywhere between 2 and 5 SEC teams. So probably looking at like 3, maybe 4. I do think Oregon is just going to make the playoff at this point. Penn State has a good shot. Ohio State, let's say all 3 of those Big Ten teams make it. That's 3 out of 12. Let's say it's Georgia, Texas, and I think Texas A&M has a better chance than LSU at this point. They've got the home game against the Tigers, and then they've got home against Texas. I think A&M's got a really good shot to make it, actually. So let's say it's those 3. So that's half of it. You're going to get 2 ACC teams. Miami and Clemson are probably going to make it. So that's 8. And then the Big 12. Right now, Iowa State and BYU were knocking on the door. Let's just knock them both in there. That's 10. There's a couple more spots. 2 more spots. You get that Big 12 one, or the group of 5 team. Say it's Boise State or someone like that. Then there's 1 extra spot. So 4 SEC teams is probably where it caps off. 5 would be pretty impressive. The problem with the SEC, even if some of these teams are better, is they are beating each other and it's hurting their records. And that's the case with all of these conferences. But you do look at the SEC and be like, well, these teams seem a little bit better. I'd rather have Ole Miss than maybe a Kansas State. And that's just an example. I don't really mean that example. But you see what I'm saying? So I have a hard time seeing Georgia not be in the top 3 or 4 of the SEC when this playoff rolls around. Now that they have that win over Texas, which I consider to be the best win in college football so far, Georgia's playoff chances went up drastically. Well, maybe that's not true, and if you look at odds, maybe that's not true. But the actual reality of this is Georgia's going to be in the college football playoff, right? Barring some serious issues, barring an unforeseen loss. I guess that at Ole Miss is its trickiest game left just because it's another road game and we know how difficult that is in the conference. But between Ole Miss, Florida, and Tennessee, one of those being at home, one of those being neutral site, and one of those being on the road, I just have more confidence in the Dogs and they should be in the SEC championship, which means they'll be locked into the playoff. That's the picture at the moment. Thanks for watching.